Welcome to I Care, I Volunteer on Rogers TV. I'm your host, Alima Hotaki. The focus of today's show is on the impact of volunteering, both social and private. Joining me on the panel are Shaminda Pereira, the Manager of Community Engagement at Volunteer MBC, as well as Adrian Beaudry, the Volunteer Engagement and Programming Manager, also for Volunteer MBC. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you for having us.
Nice having you here, for sure. So let's first off tell our viewers a little bit about Volunteer MBC.
Well, we're a volunteer center. We've been around for about 6 years now, and we do a lot of different things in the community to support volunteer engagement. I think the thing we're most known for is our commitment to helping people connect with volunteer opportunities. So people who want to volunteer, helping them find the right place to volunteer.
It's like a special catering service.
Absolutely.
Created for volunteers. Yeah. And what are some of the core services that Volunteer MBC provides?
So I think really the biggest one is that matching service. So if people want to come into our office, they can meet with our team of staff or volunteers and help connect to volunteer opportunities. We also do a lot of training for volunteer engagement professionals, helping them strengthen their skills so that they're able to better work with volunteers in the community. Those are two of the key things.
Okay. And I imagine for somebody in your position, you probably see hundreds and hundreds of volunteers come and go. How do you know that they're making an impact, a difference?
Well, it's a great question, and it's part of, I think, the profession that is so rewarding. I was talking to a friend's father last night. He volunteers with an agency driving people to cancer treatments every day. And he had a new client, and the two of them were in the car, and they were laughing and joking, and he dropped her off, and as she was getting out of the car, she turned around and thanked him. It was the first time she'd gone into her cancer treatment not afraid, feeling comfortable, not necessarily looking forward to it, but at least in a better mindset. And for him, when she turned around and said thank you, that was a huge impact. And sometimes the roles volunteers play are, you see the impact immediately when she turned around and said thank you. But sometimes we play roles that we don't see the results or the impact until later on. So for example, we have a lot of special events and marathons and runs, and along the side of the route you have hundreds of volunteers who are at the water stations giving out water to the runners. They're cheering the runners along and making sure they stay on the route. And we don't always think about the impact that those people make. But when there's nobody there to give out that water, the ripple effect is quite huge, because then that runner isn't hydrated, which could affect their health and their performance. I have been running and seen people drop because they weren't hydrated enough. And so next year when they're thinking about, well, what run am I going to do? And usually they do fundraising, well, I'm not going to do that one because they weren't very set up, they weren't prepared. And then in the long run, the agency loses out. So that one volunteer who didn't think they were making a big difference actually makes a huge difference.
That's very interesting. So you're basically saying that it's all the small things, the fine details that are making a difference?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes when you talk about making an impact, we may immediately focus on the number of hours, the number of days, or the years that volunteers have contributed. But what matters a lot is the stories that happen during those hours and years. See, we may be at a food bank, stocking shelves, or even handing over the food items when the clients are coming in. But the impact you're making is in the lives of those clients, because you are, like, even at a soup kitchen, if it's just a matter of taking the spoon and serving the client, what you're actually doing is you're feeding a person who's hungry, a fellow community member. And also when it comes to let's say you're at a park cleanup, you're with an environmental stewardship program, you're beautifying the community that you are living with, and it contributes to cleaner air, it contributes to a positive environment when you walk down the streets. So it is those little things, those little stories that we gather during those number of years that actually makes the impact in the community.
You actually have a very interesting story, because you've seen both sides. You've been the one doing the volunteering, the one who's given, and at the same time people don't understand that volunteering is also about getting, that it's kind of like good karma does find its way back somehow. And Shaminda, can you a bit tell us about the benefits and the impact it's had on you privately as an individual?
Certainly. See, when I came to Canada, the major concern that I was having, or the anxiety that I was going through, is settling down. And in that settling down, the biggest anxiety was the trying to establish myself where financial is concerned. So I needed to get a job. So I was on the job search process. Now, the process that I was taking was taking long. It didn't reap the results that I wanted, but it's volunteering that ultimately fast-tracked my job search effort and actually got me into a place where now, because I volunteered with an organization and I gave to the delivery of that organization's mission, what I did was I was giving to the community. So now the community is giving back to me. I have a good job, and I'm in a profession where I'm day in and day out, I'm doing that one good deed which some of us might be finding, trying to figure out time to do. So it's actually volunteering keeps that the cycle moving, the cycle of you giving to the community so the community can give to you, and it goes on and on.
But considering, let's say I'm going to play a bit of the devil's advocate here, if you look at the economy, the economic situation right now, how realistic is it, for example, if a newcomer comes to you and with very limited financial resources, and you ask them to put in this amount of hours volunteering, whereas they have to put food on the table, they have a family to feed, how do you help them, for example, cope with that?
The very first thing that I would always, my approach would be, the very first thing is that we try to break the mindset of volunteering being unpaid labor. Mm-hmm. It's not unpaid labor. Volunteering does not come for free. A new immigrant should always first think of, I need to settle down. I need to make myself more employable. Because I keep saying employable because those are the anxieties that you may have during a settling period. You have to think of, now how am I going to prove myself? How am I going to get that reference with me? How am I going to show something where I have practiced my skills and the organization can vouch for my skills? And in my job search process to get me the job leads, how am I going to expand my network? So even if you're not engaged with the volunteer opportunity, which is a bullet point to bullet point from the skills that you have with the duties involved in the position description, even though it's not a perfect match, you also need to think of your transferable skills. Because my profession was, by profession, for over 13 years, I've been a training and development professional in the frontline area. But I'm not a trainer right now. But I'm using the same skill sets. But at the same time, now I'm able to be very close to a passion of mine, which is youth engagement. So volunteering helped open my horizons. So I may not be by position title a trainer, but I'm doing the same thing I did before, very close to what I really like to do.
And in terms of sitting on the board of directors, how is that role different? Instead of being on the field, you're actually working behind the scenes. How does that differ?
Well, our boards play a really vital role in every organization. They take care of the governance of the organization, so making sure there's policies and procedures in place that setting the strategic direction for the organization. They bring that passion, that vision, they continue driving it forward. And they're valuable volunteers in that role as well.
And can you guys just give our viewers the website for your organization?
Certainly. It's www.volunteermbc.org. So it's actually our name and .org.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. We really appreciated that. And we have to go to break now, but we'll be back with more.
Thank you.
Welcome back to I Care, I Volunteer on Rogers TV. I'm your host, Alima Hotaki. Joining me now are three ladies from the Riverwood Conservancy. We have Robin Haley Gillen, the Volunteer Coordinator, Medea Khalid, the Marketing and Business Development Coordinator, and Trisha Kluger, who is a volunteer. Welcome on the show.
Thank you.
So, can you guys tell me a little bit about your organization?
Sure. I'll start by telling you a little bit about the Riverwood. Now, a lot of people don't know about Riverwood, but it is a beautiful 150 acres of natural space located in central Mississauga. We are like less than 5 kilometers or so from Square One. We are accessible by highways, by public transit, free admission, so lots of parking. You don't have to pay for it. And what's unique about Riverwood is that it offers people, its visitors, an all-season destination, an opportunity for them to connect with the beautiful wildlife as well as connect with nature. And the Riverwood Conservancy is one of the nonprofit organizations on site. We are a member and volunteer-based organization that offers programs and services in the areas of environmental education, volunteerism, gardening, and stewardship.
And how did your conservancy, your group, connect with Volunteer MBC?
Well, when I moved to Canada, which was about 22 years ago, I started to volunteer in Toronto. And then I worked for Volunteer Toronto. And when I got this job, one of the first things that we did was we joined the then Volunteer Center. So I know what volunteer centers can do for organizations in terms of helping us get volunteers.
And can you address some of the impact that volunteers have been making for your organization?
Well, I think one of the biggest impacts, and it's the hardest to describe, is simply visual. So Riverwood is a garden park. So there are many beautiful, beautiful gardens. Those wouldn't exist without our volunteers. They plan them, they design them, they plant them, they maintain them. They're absolutely gorgeous. We also have education programs. So I know over 17,000 students have been exposed to nature through our education programs. Tricia is a volunteer with our Discovery at Riverwood program, which is open to the public, and so we've reached 20,000 people. And it's really just introducing people to nature, keeping the park safe, keeping it beautiful. And we couldn't do any of these things without volunteers.
And what type of volunteer positions are available? What sort of roles?
It's a little bit all over the map for us, and it's a little bit limited in the wintertime. But we have gardeners, so people who work in the gardens. We have corporate groups that come. We always welcome corporate groups. They're often working on the trails. We have high school students, college students, university students who come usually in the summer and help us maintain our property. But also we have a lot of volunteers that help with all of the education programs on our committees, on our board. We have a lot of different opportunities.
Okay, I want to direct now the conversation a bit more to Trisha. You've been volunteering for the past 10 years with this group.
Yes.
What got you started?
Actually, I got started with pulling garlic mustard, which we're still doing 10 years later. But then after I retired, I wanted to get more involved. I just love going there. I go up there, you know, to get my soul and my heart going. It's just such a beautiful place, and the staff there are always so helpful and appreciative. But I do indoor things and outdoor things. I feed birds in the winter. I help with the discovery programs, introducing the speaker. I don't do the programs, but I introduce and set the room up so that the staff don't have to do that. And that's a lot of the things we mean the staff don't have to do it.
And in terms of all these environmental problems right now, and you can even see it by just looking at our current weather, one day it feels like spring, the next day it feels like winter, and we see what's been happening in Buffalo or just across the world. Do you find like that there's been an increase in people joining environmental volunteer groups because of what's happening out there?
Absolutely. And I think especially what we're seeing is a lot of high school students. They come to us for their 40 hours. they keep coming back to us. So we have some high school students who are have been back 4 years in a row. And in some cases, we've had students decide to pursue a career in the environmental field because of what they've learned, and sometimes they're bringing us information. They're doing research studies, and they help us understand why certain things are happening on the property.
And it's also great that we have environmental education programs for elementary and secondary school students, because it helps them educate and connect with nature. They are much more aware, I would say, as I was, you know, when I was in elementary school. So they know about recycling, about hand feeding birds, which they can do at Riverwood. So lots of opportunities for them.
And the corporate groups that come, they're spreading out in a different way. They help with lots of the stewardship events.
So we've been discussing a lot now in terms of the impact that people like you, and we're so grateful for people like you in terms of that, the social impact that you have, the environmental, the positive impact that you have on the outside environment and on other people's lives. But for example, Tricia, how has volunteering for the past 10 years changed you?
I guess it's changed me in some ways, but it's also enriched me. I get to meet people with similar ideas and interests, so it gets me out and about and involved in things. I meet people with similar ideas and thoughts. I get out into the fresh air. I make a commitment. It gives me a reason to get up and get out in the morning some days. So, and I keep saying I do it for me. I don't do it for them. But I do it for me because I appreciate it and I get a lot out of it. And it does help other people and things as well.
They actually have done studies on this where they say if when you volunteer, being kind, being good to others, that actually you have like a longer lifespan, you're happier, your stress levels are a lot lower. And although we don't really have an economic value on environmentalism yet, but I'm sure if somebody were to measure it, we would see just how important volunteers are. And in terms of when you guys connected with Volunteer MBC, how has that helped your organization?
I think the biggest impact that Volunteer MBC has had is they're able to help us find people with the right skill sets. So if I'm looking for someone to sit on our marketing committee, for example, who has a background in social media, I can find that usually by contacting Volunteer MBC. And we get an amazing response from whatever it is that they do, and as a result, when we did our last campaign for marketing volunteers, I think we probably got 8 new volunteers.
Does it also help in terms, because these are people that are specific, let's say they have an interest in the environment, so it probably, I'm assuming the turnover rate at your organization must be a lot lower too, because these are people who have their interest. It's not just some random person saying, I'd like to feed birds, or...
Although we get that too.
And for our audience, if you could just tell us, how can people get involved, maybe throughout your website?
Definitely go to our website. You can see information about our education programs, about how to volunteer, anything like that. It's a fairly comprehensive website. And
what is it called?
It's called the www.the-riverwoodconservancy.org. We have our social media pages as well.
Sorry, I'm going to have to cut it short. Okay, or you can go for more information, you can visit the Volunteer MBC website. We are going to a short break and we'll be back in a few minutes. Welcome back to I Care, I Volunteer on Rogers TV. I'm your host, Alima Hotaki. Joining me now from the Canadian National Institute for the Blind are Coordinator Volunteer Services, Susan Cheeseman, and November Davies, who is a volunteer. Welcome on the show, guys.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure having you. So let's start off with, can you tell me a little bit about the Canadian National Institute for the Blind?
Would you like to go ahead, November?
Well, the CNIB, as it's now come to be known as, is the only rehabilitative organization for those Canadians that are blind or partially sighted. They are not just for the blind. 9 out of 10 clients that use the CNIB services do have some sight. I do not have any sight, but I love the CNIB. They saved my life and they gave me back my independence. They have very specialized programs that will help, such as orientation and mobility. They will situate you or suit you to a cane and teach you how to identify where you're going and how to get there and back. Independent living skills. They will come into our homes, teach us how to cook safely, to identify our stove settings, our microwaves and such. There's a library services, which is phenomenal because I was a voracious reader and I didn't know how I was going to live without ever reading a book again. CNIB is just, it's fantastic.
So when did you go blind?
5 years ago.
Oh, okay.
In 5 days.
Oh, and how was that in terms of things that you took for granted, in terms of like your sight, a lot of the things that we do using sight? How did life all of a sudden feel like when you didn't have that?
It was horribly disorientating. I mean, I couldn't even get dressed properly in the mornings because I didn't know the tricks and tips that CNIB was able to teach me. To, you know, feel the seams in your clothes and tags and label your tags so you knew what you were wearing and where your clothes were going and what colors they were. Just getting around. Getting around is very important, but if you don't know which way you're going or how to identify which way, you can't do it.
And how long did that take you just to kind of readjust yourself?
It's an ongoing, it's always ongoing. I adapted very quickly. I had a little bit of notice, 5 days, and for some reason, I've always remembered reading The Miracle Worker when I was in grade school. And I remembered how Anne Sullivan taught Helen Keller to identify things. And I separated all my clothes. I separated my spice cabinet and my crayons. And then fortunately, CNIB was able to add the minor adjustments that needed to be done so I could carry on very independently.
Great. And Susan, what are some of the services that your group provides?
So November mentioned a few of them, and as she said, she took some of that preparation work and did it beforehand. However, for a lot of people, it's either gradual and just all of a sudden they can't do something. So, for instance, November mentioned orientation mobility or using one of the canes or even getting around even though you can't see signs. Not everybody needs a cane, but they need other tips and tricks. The other one that November mentioned is independent living skills. So that's one of our major services, and that's anything in the house, including communication pieces like computer and braille, and but also the day-to-day activities in the stores. So I have less sight or I have no sight. How do I find things? How do I decide what's a ripe tomato and not a ripe tomato if I can't see the color difference? And all of those things are things that we need to be able to be independent. And CNIB very much believes that you can do anything without sight that you can do with sight.
Except drive legally.
I know, but you can still travel. You just need to learn the bus route, right? Because you travel independently all the time.
All the time.
Yes, we're grateful that November doesn't try to drive with her cane. However, you know, we can all be doing all of these things, and that is what we, as the primary rehabilitation for vision provider, that's what we do with people.
Do some of your volunteers, do they require a special certification, or like how does the training sessions, how do they work?
That's a great question. For the most part, I think that there's a couple of different things that all of our volunteers need to know, and we cover that. It's one of the things that we cover within the orientation, and that is sighted guide techniques. So it's how to be a partner with a person who's partially sighted or blind to go places that you don't know together. So for instance, coming into the studio today, November can be an independent traveler all the time, but there's a whole bunch of things to go around, some cords, everything. So we did sighted guide technique to come in. So whether you're working in our office or whether you're a VisionMate volunteer with somebody in their home, you need to have at least the basics of sighted guide.
Definitely. And how has connecting with Volunteer MBC helped your group?
Absolutely. Volunteer MBC is wonderful. They are our primary recruiter for us. I would say that approximately, now we do have 2 volunteer centers in our area, but for the Peel area, probably 80 to 90% of our potential volunteers that come through to us come through in an email from Volunteer MBC, to which I send back information around when's the next orientation and what a little bit of the process and what our forms are for them to go through. Now, other people come into our service like November did, which is as, I've received some services from CNIB, I love them, I want to give back.
And November, that's actually really interesting. How does somebody like November who is blind or partially sighted, how does she give back? What are some of the roles in case there are people who might also be out there listening to the program? What are some ways that you contribute?
Well, as an ambassador, I try to set a good example every time I'm out, but I also I tell people about CNIB, about the wonderful things they do, and the things that can be achieved just by being a volunteer. I go out, I give presentations to different groups, Rotary clubs, Lions clubs, schools, anybody and everybody that will listen to me, to tell them A, about being blind, and it's not so bad really, and B, about what we can give back and what we can offer. And the use of volunteers, the wonderful, it's not just being a sighted guide, it's being a VisionMate, taking someone shopping or to a car show, or just reading a book to them. It's going in and being an ambassador, being able to go out to different organizations and tell them about CNIB, or sitting at the mall when there's sidewalk sales at a kiosk and telling people about the different...
Sorry, we're running short on time, so to find more information, they can obviously go and visit the CNIBC website, or they can visit the Volunteer MBC website. Thank you for coming on our show, and on behalf of everyone here at Rogers TV, thank you for watching, and we hope you join us for our next episode of I Care, I Volunteer.